The ballroom of the Monroe estate glittered like a jewel box, all crystal and candlelight and the muted rustle of designer gowns. 200 of Manhattan's elite sipped champagne while the string quartet swayed through Vivaldi, and I stood at the edge of it all, invisible despite my mother's sapphire gown clinging to my shoulders. My father, Charles Monroe, stood across the room with his new wife, Veronica. She was perfection incarnate, platinum blonde, emerald eyes, the kind of beauty that turned heads and commanded rooms. 3 years ago, she'd swept into our lives as his nurse, and somehow, she'd never left. I watched him laugh at something she whispered, his hand finding the small of her back. The gesture stung. It was the same gesture he used to make with my mother before cancer took her when I was 12. "Juliet, darling." I turned to find Marcus Chen, the family's accountant, holding 2 flutes of champagne. Marcus was one of the few people in this world who still looked at me like I existed. His dark eyes held genuine warmth, a rarity in circles where affection was a transaction. "Thank you," I said, accepting the glass. "You look exhausted." He smiled. "Your father's been paranoid about the foundation's finances lately. Asking odd questions." Before I could respond, a commotion erupted near the main staircase. My father's voice cut through the soft hum of violins like a whip. "Tell everyone what you did." My stomach dropped. Veronica descended the staircase in a champagne-colored gown, my mother's diamond bracelet glittering at her wrist. The bracelet I'd locked in the safe years ago. The one piece of my mother's legacy I'd kept close, unwilling to let it be tainted by a stepdaughter's hands. "Father, I began, pushing through the crowd. "Your own stepdaughter," Veronica interrupted, her voice trembling with perfectly calculated sadness. "After everything Charles and I have done for you. We opened our home. We loved you." She lifted her chin, and 2 crystalline tears rolled down her cheeks. The crowd fell silent, captivated. I reached for my father, but he stepped back. His eyes, the same gray as mine, had turned to stone. "Juliet," he said quietly, and the quiet was somehow worse than any shout. "You've embarrassed this family for the last time. Security will escort you out." 2 guards advanced, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Panic slammed through me, but I refused to look away from my father's face, searching for the man who'd taught me to ride horses and read Shakespeare. That man was gone. Marcus caught my arm as I passed, pressing something small into my palm. My mother's ring, the one I'd removed earlier to wash my hands. I squeezed it, grateful, then let the guards lead me away. The camera flashes came before we even reached the doors. Veronica had tipped them off. Of course she had. The rain fell in sheets as I stood on 5th Avenue in a ruined gown and broken heels. Through the glass doors behind me, I could see my father's silhouette. His hand was wrapped around Veronica's waist. She was smiling. Not a victim's smile. A victor's smile. I gripped my mother's ring, the metal biting into my palm, and something crystallized inside me. A cold, clear fury that cut through the panic and tears. She had framed me. The realization came with absolute certainty. My father was many things, rigid, traditional, sometimes cold, but he wasn't stupid. Yet he believed her without question, without asking for proof, without even looking at me. Unless she'd planted seeds long before tonight. "She's so troubled since her mother died," I remembered Veronica saying, her voice dripping with concern during a family dinner months ago. "I worry she's not coping well. My sister struggled with kleptomania, hereditary, you know. It does terrible things to the mind." I'd brushed it off at the time. But my father had listened, his expression darkening slightly. "She took my mother's pearls," Veronica had continued gently. "I found them in her room. I didn't want to upset you, Charles, but I'm worried." Truly. She'd shown him the pearls. I'd found them later, she'd planted them in my room, then had discovered them with my father's help. And he'd apologized, awkwardly, assuming I was troubled. A pattern. That's what it was. Small accusations, planted evidence, crocodile tears. And with each incident, his faith in me eroded. I stood in the rain, shivering in a ruined gown, and made a vow to the thunder above, I will survive this. And I will prove the truth. 6 years. That's how long I lived under a false name, working doubles at a diner in Brooklyn, sleeping in studio apartments that smelled of mildew and old coffee. While my father's face graced society pages, while Veronica expanded her charitable foundation to international acclaim, I learned law, finance, forensic accounting, the intricate architecture of wealth hiding itself. I hired a private investigator who confirmed what I already suspected: Veronica had systematically pillaged the Monroe Foundation. She'd transferred millions to offshore accounts, created shell organizations, crafted fake donations to launder the proceeds. My mother's life's work, decades of philanthropy and legacy, had become her personal piggy bank. But there was more. Much more. I found records of her previous marriage to an elderly man who'd died under suspicious circumstances. He'd left her everything, and within 2 years, that fortune had vanished too. She'd done it before. She was a professional. A predator with a gift for manipulation and a face that made people want to believe her. I also discovered Marcus Chen's growing unease. The accountant had been watching the numbers too, and they didn't add up. He'd confronted my father, but Veronica had smoothly suggested that Marcus himself might be embezzling. 3 months later, Marcus had left the firm, his reputation damaged, his confidence shattered. She'd isolated him. Just as she'd isolated me. I reached out to him at the end of year 2. We met in a coffee shop in Queens, and when he recognized me, his eyes filled with tears. "I knew you didn't do it," he said. "I knew. I tried to tell your father, but..." "I know." I squeezed his hand. "I need your help." From that moment, Marcus became my anchor. He helped me gather documents, trace transactions, build an irrefutable case. We worked quietly, methodically, never rushed. Patience, I'd learned, was the deadliest weapon. By year 5, I had lawyers ready. By year 6, I had journalists lined up. And then, the invitation arrived. 6 years of hope, the Monroe Foundation Gala. The date was set for the exact anniversary of the night they destroyed me. It was too perfect to be coincidence. Veronica was celebrating 6 years of success with the very foundation she'd stolen from. I held the embossed invitation and whispered to the empty apartment, "It's time to come home." I arrived at the Monroe Foundation Gala precisely at 9 p.m., 15 minutes after the main crowd. My reflection in the hallway mirror was a stranger. I'd cut my long dark hair into a chic bob. New cheekbones emerged from the softness I'd carried for years, a combination of stress and careful weight loss. The black velvet gown was custom-made, elegant but forgettable. I wore dark lipstick and the smallest diamond studs. Everything about me whispered wealth and poise, but nothing screamed Juliette Monroe. The ballroom was exactly as I remembered: soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, the soft notes of the string quartet playing in the corner. But the faces had changed. New money. New social hierarchies. And then I saw him. My father stood with his arm around Veronica, laughing at something a donor had said. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes, gray creeping through his dark hair. But his posture was still regal, still commanding. For a moment, I couldn't move. 6 years of planning, of survival, of building this moment, it all crystallized in my chest like ice. Veronica turned, as if sensing my gaze. Her smile faltered. Just for a fraction of a second. Just enough. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition, perhaps, or the first seed of fear. She didn't know who I was, but something about me had triggered an alarm in that predatory brain of hers. I turned away, lifting a champagne flute from a passing waiter's tray, and glided into the crowd. I could feel her watching me. Good. By 10 p.m., the journalists had arrived. Sarah Mitchell from the New York Times and David Park from Bloomberg were positioned near the silent auction tables. They held their phones casually, looking like guests, but they were ready. I'd spent months building trust with them, feeding them breadcrumbs, letting them do their own investigation. They'd found most of the truth independently, I'd simply guided them to the rest. Marcus stood near the bar, supposedly admiring the open bar menu. He had a USB drive in his pocket containing every document we'd gathered, bank transfers, forged contracts, offshore account registrations. Everything. My ally, David Castellano, a lawyer I'd met through a mutual contact and cultivated carefully, was in the anteroom with a security team ready to freeze Veronica's personal accounts and seize the Foundation's records the moment I gave the signal. Everything was in place. Everything was waiting. I approached the bar and ordered a martini, standing close enough to Marcus that we could speak without drawing attention. "Everyone's ready," he said quietly, not looking at me. "Then it's time." Veronica clinked her glass for a toast at 10:30. She floated toward the microphone in that champagne gown, diamonds catching the light, looking every inch the graceful philanthropist. The crowd turned toward her, reverent. She'd been doing this for 6 years, accepting praise, collecting accolades, standing on the foundation my mother had built. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice warm and honeyed. 6 years ago, my beloved husband and I made a commitment to this city. To its people. To change. I watched from the back of the room, my expression serene. Tonight, we celebrate the lives we've touched, the children we've educated, the futures we've. The door at the side of the ballroom opened. Sarah Mitchell entered, followed by David Park and a cameraman. They weren't subtle. They didn't need to be. Veronica's eyes went wide. Her voice faltered. She gripped the microphone, knuckles whitening. "Excuse me, security." "Veronica Sterling," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the murmurs that had begun spreading through the crowd. "We need to speak with you about the Monroe Foundation's finances." Chaos erupted. Donors leaned together, whispering. Phones emerged. David Park moved through the crowd, handing printed documents to board members, bank transfers, all traced and verified. The evidence was irrefutable. My father stepped forward, his face flushed with confusion and anger. "What is this?" "Security, remove them." "Sir," David said, approaching my father directly, "we have documentation of systematic fraud. Your wife has transferred approximately $42 million from the foundation to personal accounts over the past 6 years. The number hung in the air like a bomb. That's absurd, Veronica snapped, but her voice had lost its honeyed quality. It was sharp, panicked. Charles, this is a setup. They're trying to. We have her emails, Sarah interrupted, holding up her phone. Your authorization of transfers. Your creation of shell organizations. My father looked at his wife. Really looked at her. And I saw it, the moment doubt cracked through his certainty. For the next hour, everything fell apart with beautiful precision. The board members left the gala pale and furious. Donors demanded refunds. The police arrived with a warrant to secure the foundation's records. Veronica's carefully constructed persona shattered like glass dropped from a height. I watched her age in real time. The perfect posture collapsed into something hunched and desperate. The smile became a grimace. When she tried to speak, her voice cracked. My father sat down heavily in one of the gilded chairs, his face ashen. A server brought him water. He didn't drink it. And then, Sarah Mitchell approached me. You're the source, she said. It wasn't a question. I'm a concerned party, I replied evenly. She studied me. Then, slowly, recognition flickered across her face. Juliette Monroe? I didn't confirm or deny. I simply smiled. Sarah's eyes widened. The daughter. The one from 6 years ago. The scandal that got you exiled, that was her setup too, wasn't it? Find your own truth, I said gently. You're good enough to do it. I walked away before she could ask more questions, gliding through the chaos toward my father. He looked up as I approached, his gray eyes, my gray eyes, filled with anguish and something else. Shame, perhaps. Or the beginning of understanding. Juliette, he whispered. For a moment, I was tempted to walk away. To leave him here, drowning in the wreckage of his choices. But I thought of my mother, of the years I'd lost, of the fact that he was still my father, still the man who'd taught me to read Shakespeare even if he'd forgotten how to read people. "Hello, Father," I said quietly. "I think we need to talk." The police car took Veronica away at 11:15 p.m. She'd attempted to flee through the kitchen, which was both pathetic and fitting. The officers were professional but thorough as they read her rights. She'd gone very quiet by then, all the fight drained out of her. The woman who'd orchestrated my downfall with such elegance now looked small and hollow. My father and I sat in his office on the third floor of the Monroe building, away from the chaos below. "She set you up," he said. It wasn't a question. He was finally beginning to understand the full architecture of her manipulation. "Yes. The bracelet. The stolen donations she claimed you'd taken. All of it." "All of it was her," I confirmed. He put his head in his hands. "I failed you." Those 4 words sat between us like a chasm. "You did," I said, not unkindly. "You chose to believe her without listening to me. You let her isolate you. You allowed her to remake reality into whatever shape benefited her." I paused. "But yes, you also failed me." He looked up, tears streaming down his face. "How did you survive?" 6 years. By learning that survival requires 3 things: patience, truth, and people who believe in you. I thought of Marcus, of the journalists, of the lawyers who'd worked quietly in the background. I had all 3. "Can you forgive me?" I considered this honestly. "I don't know yet. But I'm willing to try." 3 months later, the news had stabilized into a narrative that the media loved: the villain exposed, the victim vindicated, the father-daughter reconciliation ongoing but fragile. Veronica was facing federal fraud charges. The trial would take years, but the evidence was airtight. She'd be imprisoned by autumn. My father had stepped down from the Monroe Foundation as CEO and had publicly acknowledged that I would be rebuilding it. His statement had been careful, admitting to his regrettable misjudgment regarding his former wife and expressing his pride in my resilience. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. I sat in the foundation's office, my office now, looking at the books that Marcus and I had been meticulously reconstructing. We were tracing every dollar, restoring every program she'd gutted, rebuilding what had been stolen. Marcus entered with 2 cups of coffee. "The new education initiative is approved by the board," he said, handing me a cup. "We can begin enrolling students next fall." "Good." I sipped the coffee gratefully. "Have you decided whether you're going to accept the CFO position?" He smiled. "I already have. But only on one condition." "What's that?" "That you let me help you rebuild this place. Properly. Together." I felt something unfold in my chest, not quite forgiveness, not quite peace, but something close. "Together," I agreed. 6 months after the gala, I stood in my apartment overlooking Central Park, the city glittering below me like diamonds scattered across black velvet. My father had called an hour earlier. He'd been in therapy, working through his own complicity in what had happened. He asked to take me to dinner. I'd said yes. It would be a beginning, if not a happy ending. Veronica's face had mostly disappeared from the news, replaced by fresh scandals and new victims needing vindication. She'd become the cautionary tale, the woman who'd overplayed her hand. But more importantly, she'd become a precedent. 3 other victims of her manipulation had come forward. The authorities were reopening cases dating back 15 years. I thought of the girl I'd been, terrified, confused, exiled by the people who were supposed to love her. I thought of the woman I'd become, patient, strategic, unbreakable. The victory, I'd discovered, wasn't in Veronica's downfall. It wasn't in the headlines or the applause or even in my father's belated recognition of the truth. The victory was in survival itself. In becoming someone worthy of the life they'd tried to steal. I pressed my mother's ring to my lips, the one that Marcus had pressed into my palm on that rainy night 6 years ago. She'd wanted to build something good in this world. Now, the foundation bearing her legacy would do exactly that. Tomorrow, I would announce the first annual scholarship program bearing my mother's name. It would educate 200 students who had no access to quality education. It would be part of my mother's legacy, rebuilt from ashes. And it would prove, definitively, that truth is not just justice. Truth is freedom. I whispered into the night, my voice steady and clear. I was exiled by my family. But I returned as my own woman. And I am finally, completely, undeniably free. The courthouse was cold and professional as Veronica was led away in her orange prison jumpsuit, her conviction final after a brief appeal. My father sat beside me in the gallery. We didn't touch, but we were present for each other. It was enough for now. Sarah Mitchell's book about the scandal, The Poisoned Crown, How One Woman Orchestrated Fraud and Betrayal, had just hit #1 on the bestseller list. She'd portrayed me fairly, I thought. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. An architect of my own redemption. The Monroe Foundation had expanded to 3 cities. 50 former employees whose names had been cleared received settlements. My mother's name was back where it belonged, at the foundation's entrance, in letters of bronze. And me? I'd learned that revenge isn't about destruction. It's about truth. It's about reclaiming the narrative, the legacy, the very identity that someone tried to steal. As I left the courthouse with Marcus at my side, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. The woman looking back was someone my mother would have been proud of. Someone I was proud of. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. I was erased. Gaslit. Exiled by the people who promised to love me. But I learned something in those 6 years of silence, that invisibility isn't weakness. It's reconnaissance. My survival wasn't quiet because I was afraid. It was quiet because I was building. Because I was winning. If your family chose to believe a liar over you, that's not a reflection of your worth. That's a reflection of their blindness. Your boundaries aren't difficult, they're dignified. Your silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. They tried to rewrite my story, but I refused to stay erased. I didn't scream my truth, I built it, piece by piece, until the entire world had no choice but to see it. Respect isn't something you earn from people who never deserved your love. It's something you claim for yourself, regardless of who's watching. If this resonated, share it with someone who's been gaslit into invisibility. Tell them, your worth was never in question, it was only ever waiting to be remembered. Subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your narrative, turning humiliation into power, and building the empire they said you couldn't have. Because the revolution doesn't start with revenge. It starts with remembering who you are.